Hey, here for another TV6 Investigates Talks. I'm William Ingalls here with TV6 Investigates Matt Christensen. We had a pretty big decision come down from the Iowa Supreme Court. Matt, tell us a little bit about it.
Sure. It's a case that involves government transparency, access to public records, and Scott County, Iowa. And essentially what happened in this case is that an opening came open on the county board. Instead of holding an election, the county decided to fill it, appointed a committee to fill it, but it wouldn't tell anybody who had applied for the jobs. So some residents sued, and that's sort of the essence of the case.
Right, yeah, because they wanted to know who all wanted this job, and Scott County said that was private, or at the very least not for open records.
Exactly.
I think a lot of people would probably just wonder, like, why would Scott County want to keep this under wraps? Through like the court paperwork, was there any clear answer as to why they didn't want this out there?
Sure. I think the concern from the county was that if it was a public process and that people could see if somebody applied, that it was going to,
Discourage people from maybe throwing their hat in the ring?
100%. That's exactly the way to put it. And so it had asked those applicants, do you want your application open or not? And more than half said no problem, but
right.
it kept the other ones confidential.
Right, so even the ones that said they were okay with having their name out there, were their names put out there, or was it just the people who like checked the box for like, I don't want this out there?
Yeah, the check the box.
Okay.
So the seat came open when Supervisor Tony Kenobi won election to county treasurer, and that was about a year and a half ago, I guess. And the board ultimately decided to appoint Rita Rawson to the seat. But the public was completely in the dark about who had applied, to take that spot. So it's hard for the public to weigh in on who their next elected leader is without knowing who is seeking the job.
Yeah, people who make decisions about who, like, which roads get fixed next, where their tax dollars go, obviously that's an important voice for that Scott County community, and they want a voice on, like, hey, these are the people we support and these are the ones we go against, even if they ultimately don't make that decision, because I believe the county board would then vote on that appointment, wouldn't they?
Right.
So even though they're technically not the ones making that decision, they still at the very least have that right to go to the public comments at the very least, or even let their other board members know, like, hey, like, here's who we like, here's who we have a problem with.
Exactly. And that was the essence of the arguments that were made by county resident named Alan Dirks, Dr. Alan Dirks, and then a former supervisor, Dan Holtz. And they were the ones who brought the case originally. And their argument was exactly what you just said. It's that this process shouldn't occur in secret. And it's not a problem with the process itself, it's just how it was done.
Right, and obviously, when on our end of the table as journalists, obviously we care, anytime that there's more open records and more public access is good. Does this open the door to anything else, or is this kind of just an isolated case of like, hey, this is just for job applications, or in this very specific use case that we have more access?
No, I think it sets a much broader precedent, and that's going to apply to any public body across the state of Iowa. And essentially that when, it's going to say that when folks try to get involved in government through an appointment process to an elected position at least, which happens a lot, that in those cases that the public is going to have a right to know who's seeking those spots and be able to weigh in before decisions get made.
Right, I mean, you and I have, covered journalism for some time, it's, in fact, Scott County's one of the bigger, boards that you'll look at, but you mentioned this happens all the time, you have small county boards where someone retires early, or, someone gets elected to another post or takes another job.
In the case of the city of Davenport recently, when someone gets kicked off the council.
Yes, that as well, but it's these smaller bodies of government that actually have a big say with your tax dollars, that ultimately people are going to now have a chance to at least weigh in on those people who would get reappointed to those spots. And I know it sounds like inside baseball, but you and I look at, pages and pages of agendas and documents where these tax dollars, come into play, you know. It's, some of these councils are 5 to 7 people, and it's like, hey, one vote one way or the other of whether you raise a tax levy. That's an important seat.
It's a big deal. And these positions are typically elected positions for a reason, right? It's so that the public can have a say in these kind of things. And you're absolutely right that, most government is local for people. you know, it's your mayors and your county board members and your city councilmen, your school board members that are really dictating a lot of what happens in your
Right.
life. And so anytime that there's more transparency that goes along with that process, I think it's going to be celebrated, not just by journalists, but any advocates of open government. Like in this case, the Iowa Freedom of Information Council filed a brief in the case, you know, arguing that these should be public record, and they represent not just journalists across the state, but you know, they really fight to keep government records open. So you're right. I mean, it's sort of a specific example, but there's a much larger issue at play.
One last thing I want to touch on before we go is that this was a split decision. This wasn't unanimous. All the Supreme Court justices said one way or the other. Kind of explain the dissenting view in this case of who said that these should be kept under wraps.
Right. It was a close case. It was 4-3. So
as close as it gets, one might say.
That's exactly right. As close as it gets. And the argument of the dissent sort of hinged on what we talked about earlier, that it would discourage folks from maybe applying. They thought that was perhaps a valid point. There's also a more narrow interpretation of Iowa Chapter 22, which is the Public Records Code.
Right, which is deep inside baseball.
It
Partially
is.
what we get into here,
Right,
but
right,
even the
right.
people who seek this out, we don't want to get too granular in just the
Right.
words. But I mean, that's ultimately what they do, and that's where you have people who've studied the law for years and years and years are supposed to go word by word. What is the letter of the law? And that's just kind of what they viewed, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Whenever these rulings come out, I think all the journalists grab them, flip through the first 16, 18
Yeah, get down to
pages,
that
and
last,
get
like, three
the
paragraphs.
conclusion, right? It sums up everything. And if you want to know the legal arguments, I mean, they're all made in great depth. And we posted the argument or the ruling on our website. So if folks really want to look through it and see for themselves. The ruling's on there, but also the minority dissent is on there too. So if you really wanted to nerd out,
Yes, if you want to go granular, we got all the granular you can ask for. Well, I think that was some really good stuff, going in depth and beyond what we can cover in a minute and a half on the news.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much for joining us for this episode of TV6 Investigates Talks. We'll see you for the next one.